Hi everyone, it's Ben here. How are you doing, guys? Good to see you. Been inspired to return to a topic that I had discussed before with you. Maybe at this point it's probably about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. You know, it's been a while. And that video at the time was called the INFJ Charisma, and I thought that it would be interesting to have an update of that content, you know, augmented with some additional insights that I've gathered over the last couple of years, and also taking advantage of this new video to try to focus, you know, this discussion on a slightly different, perspective. So I think that if you look at my previous video on INFJ Charisma, you'll notice that it's mostly a description of what the INFJ Charisma is, at least in potential, and and how it can be channeled, you know, by INFJs. So I think that was within the perspective of trying to tell INFJs that they have a lot more charisma than they typically believe themselves to have. Again, at least in potential, because a lot of these things are about the potential that you have developing something. You know, things are not given to you straight away. You need to make a bit of an effort. You need to mold yourself into a certain kind of personality, but these things are attainable, and sometimes these things are facilitated by a particular constitution that you have as a person of a certain type. And so in this video I want to move toward a discussion that is a lot more practical. That is, instead of talking about, you know, just what the INFJ charisma is and how it can be described and what range it has, what potential it has, I'm going to talk to you about some hopefully practical enough steps that you can try to follow if you want to work on that charisma. So let's go. I've decided to divide this video into 3 particular parts, and each of the parts are titled according to a particular side of the INFJ personality that I believe can be channeled, can be worked on, can be developed to fully exploit your charismatic potential. From a perspective, you know, of use that is not purely motivated by, oh, I want to have charisma, but more, what do I want to have charisma for? Influence. As we will see, the reason why an INFJ would want to work on their charisma, especially some ethical reasons a lot of the time, is it's not just a concern that arises from the INFJ because they're inherently ethical people. It's because, to a great extent, the charisma that an INFJ can have is linked to a certain form of ethical authority that they can have. So the 3 dimensions of the charismatic INFJ that I'm proposing to you now are the following. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the mystic, then I'll move on to a discussion of the counselor, and thirdly I will talk about a slightly lesser known dimension of INFJ charisma, but I think actually over time and experience I've realized it's quite an important one as well, and that's the diplomat. The mystic, the counselor, and the diplomat. The charismatic INFJ, the most charismatic INFJ, has all these 3, okay? So let's go. So what is the dimension called the mystic? Well, the dimension of the INFJ called the mystic, and which tends to give an INFJ a certain aura, which plays an important part in the charisma, has to do with their unique vision. Now, this is facilitated by the fact that an INFJ is an NI-DOM, and as an NI-DOM, your intuition is predominant in your life, in your relationship to the world. It's subjective, it's related to you, and perhaps importantly, something to mention is in a population of 100 people, it's likely that there will be only 3 or 4 people who have that subjective intuition as their dominant function. You take the percentage of the population of INTJs plus INFJs, you have about 3 or 4%. That means you're unusual. You are unusual and you have an unusual vision. I call it the mystic for this reason, not particularly because you come across as a strange, hermit that believes in mystical things, more that your vision of the world and how you see the world, your perception of the world, is likely to be more unique than it is for most people. And even compared to the people for whom, the vision and the perception of the world is also quite unique, in a certain sense you're at an advantage because of your dominant NI. NI is the mystical function, by definition. If you pay attention, for example, to like an NE user, for example, a lot of NE dominants are charismatic, but it's not necessarily coming from the singularity of their vision or of their perception of the world, because the NE dominance tends to be quick, witty, have lots of different ideas. It's not always clear how these different ideas coalesce into a unique vision, and that's functionally related to what dominance, extroverted perception, extroverted intuition, looks like. It's not constituted in such a way as to begin from the point of view of singularity, whereas an INFJ has that. So work on your vision. Try to develop, basically, try to arrive at something that you already have. You're just not always aware or conscious of the fact you have, which is this unique perception on the world. What is your worldview? How do you see the world? What is your inner philosophy? Work on it, develop it, become more confident in it, and you will automatically develop more and more of that aura, and people will be attracted, at least they will be intrigued by your singularity. Like I said, it will just transpire in the way you are. Own it. Do not be ashamed of it. There's something that is, if there's a takeaway from this video, it's do not fall into the trap of thinking, oh, woe is me, I'm an INFJ, therefore no one understands me, I fade into the background, no one listens to me, I'm an introvert. Like this, to be honest, if this is your perspective, I'm going to be honest with you. If this is your perspective, you'll never be charismatic. You'll never have any charisma. So if you want to have charisma, you need to get rid of that victim logic. You're not a loser. You're not a depressed loner who cannot be understood. There's few people that can understand you, but there are some people that can understand you, and you can have an impact on a lot of people. Make use of the fact that you can understand people in the world. So develop your mystic insight and be proud of it. Wear it on your sleeves. So people will be attracted, intrigued. And if you can work on your extroversion a little bit, if it's obviously for people who are very introverted, that's more difficult, but charisma requires usually at least a bit of extroversion. If people ask you questions, want to know about your perspective, because they're likely to want to know, at least some people will ask some questions at certain points. Calmly explain it to the extent that you can. Do not feel ashamed of it, okay? So that's the first thing, the mystic. Embrace your unique perception of the world. It's in there, wear it on your sleeves. Now the second aspect, like I said, is what I call the counselor. It's probably the most well-known aspect or dimension of the INFJ personality, is that, again, especially if you work a bit on your introversion, if you manage to reach out to people as much as you can, do not overestimate the fact that you don't need people, okay? Because that's not healthy. Like a lot of websites will tell you introverts, like all these memes about introverts, I don't need people, I like to stay on my own, I don't like to go out, and it's almost like it's a cool thing. But to me, that's bullshit, okay? Of course we need more time to recharge our batteries, we need to decompress a lot, and that has to be taken into account. But by all means, go out, meet people, interact with people that you're interested in, because this is the best way of engaging your extroverted functions and avoiding NITI looping. So you engage FE and SE, and the best way for an INFJ to be confident, and the best way for an INFJ to be confident, which is one of the bases of charisma, is health. A healthy INFJ. And a healthy INFJ is not an INFJ who's always staying at home, saying woe is me, and doesn't see people. Okay? Like, I'm not saying that these people should be blamed. I'm saying you have the potential to be so much more than that. And if you allow yourself to have the potential to be so much more than that, you will develop more charisma, because the potential for charisma is inbuilt. It's in you through NI and through FE. So in the case of the counselor dimension, NI is still present because you have a lot of insight, not only about your unique vision, your unique perception of the world, but you can read people quite easily, quite intuitively. If you don't allow yourself to go outside in the world, you won't develop that function as much as you could, by the way. Notice that, okay? So there's that. You're an insightful person. People need to know that you're an insightful person, okay? For you to be a charismatic. A correct charismatic person is someone who draws people to them, okay? Now, people can be drawn to you because they're really interested in your insights, as in the case of the mystic dimension, like I said, but they're also going to be really interested in your advice. A counselor is the type that gives advice. Not only is it easy for them to give advice, but it is usually taken quite to heart. Okay, so in order to facilitate this, again, I keep using the word, this potential as an advisor, because you can say advisor as well as counselor. I think it's important in this case to have a clear idea of what your moral standing is, what your moral beliefs are, because you can understand people easily and intuitively. This is one of your strengths. But unlike FI users, you're not necessarily born, or you don't necessarily grow up with a very intuitive and subjectively direct understanding of what your fundamental values are. You're not as anchored in your values, and therefore in an ethical framework, as automatically as an FI user. This is because your feeling function is extroverted, so which means that your feeling judgments are directed toward the object. So you need to latch onto an ethical system that suits you. It doesn't have something to be, it doesn't have to be something that you come up with, but it has to be something that you agree with and that you think is what you believe in. So it could be human rights, it could be something more specific, it could be a sincere belief in the importance of openness or empathy or justice, but you need to have a set of values that you stick to. INFJs, again, not FI users, so as long as you don't have that moral framework from outside that you allow yourself to discover and embrace, you're not as anchored, and you're likely to slip. And if you slip a bit, it means that sometimes in the advice you give, you can end up being a bit inconsistent, or it could end up, your advice you give could end up giving too much room to telling people what they want to hear rather than what you should be told them, what you really think. Again, it's linked to confidence, it's linked to having an ethical framework you strongly believe in, it's linked to caring for the welfare of the person you're giving advice to over the long term. Now, all this means that you need to have the confidence to tell them the truth of what you think, not what they want to hear. If you tell them they want to hear, it will be a slight pat on the back, won't be very useful to them in the long term, and it will do nothing for your charisma. If you come across as someone who has the reputation of telling people what you think, they will take your advice very seriously, they will take it credibly, and they will be drawn to you. So it contributes to charisma. So that's the counselor, okay? Now, lastly, let's take a moment to discuss the dimension of the diplomat. Now, this is, I think, a slightly underestimated strength of the INFJ. Very, very, very strong. INFJs are very strong in that regard. If, again, they allow themselves to be a little bit social, and if they allow themselves to have trust in their intuitions and in their ability to make judgments. You notice that sometimes, if you say you're sharing, an apartment with housemates, or you're in a big group of friends, over time, people enter into conflict. People have clashes. There's tension, there's crises, there's all these things. It's part of human nature, that's what happens. It has been my empirical, observation over the last few years that INFJs are very good at somehow not getting involved in these too much. Now, you could say that's because they're doormats. Whenever someone pushes a position, they're just, they're pushovers, they're just accepted because they cannot stand the idea of conflict. Now that's a possibility, but I don't think it's the best approach. The best approach is to be neutral, to be impartial, and to never allow yourself to become too emotional in an exchange. Now, if it's an exchange, if it's a crisis that involves different people, the more impartial you are, the more you don't take sides, the more you will be a credible mediator between the different conflictual factions, the parties. And they will come to you and they will respect your position. And if you can remain calm, never take sides. This is very important. Again, I want to insist on this. It's important for any dimension of the INFJ charisma. Do not be partial. Even when you want to, even when you think that perhaps it's a bit unfair to not be a little bit partial, because in your heart of hearts you have an idea who is more right than the other, still do not do this, because if you do this, you will not only lose credibility with the person that you've not chosen to take sides with, but you will also lose credibility with the persons that you've taken sides with, because the person will just think, well, if it had been the other guy, maybe he would have taken sides with them, or she would have taken sides with them. Okay? In a certain sense, you have to be tough. You don't need to be physically tough. You don't need to be tough in terms of being very blunt, but you need to be tough about where you stand. Do not take sides, but provide some diplomatic advice between people in regards to how to achieve peace again, because with an I and with FE, this is a domain that the INFJ is remarkably strong in. We have a natural ability to notice the patterns that can lead back to peace, the things that should not be said, the sacrifices, the little sacrifices that a person can make to signal to the other person that they're willing to make an effort. Swallowing pride when it's important, not swallowing pride, showing your pride when it's important. We can see these things and we can advise people. So we can advise individually. In this case, we're in a more counselor position, but we can also advise severally in the case of people who are in conflict. But we're not in the conflict. Usually we're outside it if we don't allow ourselves to go inside. This means remaining neutral. This doesn't mean being soft. It just means you don't take sides. But you can help mediate. So in this case, the diplomat could also be called the mediator, okay? And this will draw people to you because they'll think, oh, okay, who's a very respected member of this group of friends? This is X person, happens to be INFJ and is perceived as the mediator. And you could also be that person who draws people to you because they really, really appreciate your advice. They think that there's a dignity in the advice you give and a justice. And they can also be attracted to you, as in the first dimension, for the very unusual and kind of captivating, way in which you look at things. And if you can add up these three dimensions and have them well developed with a tiny bit of extroversion, you will be a charismatic person, I assure you. All right, see you guys. Let me know what you think.